The alarm didn't go off at 5 a.m. It hadn't for 3 years. My body just knew. Some internal mechanism had rewired itself to snap awake at that exact moment, regardless of how little sleep I'd gotten the night before. That Tuesday morning was no different. I lay there for maybe 10 seconds, staring at the ceiling I'd designed myself. Coffered panels with recessed lighting that Linda once said made her feel like she was sleeping in a cathedral. Now the lights stayed off. She didn't notice things like that anymore. "David?" Her voice came from beside me, thin and confused. "David, where are we?" "We're home, sweetheart. We're in our bedroom." "Oh," a pause. "Whose bedroom?" I sat up and swung my legs over the side of the bed. "Ours. You and me. We've lived here for 22 years. She processed this information the way she processed everything now, like someone trying to read a book in a language they'd forgotten. I watched her face cycle through confusion, then acceptance, then a strange kind of peace that came from simply giving up on understanding. 3 years ago, when Dr. Reyes first gave us the diagnosis, I'd asked what to expect. She'd described the progression in clinical terms: memory loss, confusion, personality changes, eventual loss of motor function. What she hadn't described was this: the daily erosion of everything that made Linda who she was. The woman who could quote Shakespeare and mix the perfect martini and argue constitutional law with anyone who'd listen. All of it, dissolving like sugar in water. The Linda I'd married could name every partner at her firm and remember the birthday of every client. This Linda couldn't remember what day it was or why there was a strange man in her bedroom. "I need to use the bathroom," she said. "Okay, let me help you." I guided her out of bed with practiced movements, hand under her elbow, steady pressure on her lower back, the careful choreography of keeping a woman upright when her legs had forgotten how to cooperate. We shuffled toward the bathroom together, her nightgown trailing on the floor because she'd lost weight again and nothing fit anymore. "You're nice," she said as I helped her sit. "Are you my husband?" "Yes, I'm your husband." "Oh." She considered this. "I think I had a husband once. He built houses." "He designed them," I said. "Houses, offices, libraries. He was an architect." "That sounds nice. Where is he now?" I looked at her face, the face I'd loved for 22 years, now slack with confusion and age, and I couldn't bring myself to answer. This was my life now. At 54 years old, I'd become an expert in things I never wanted to know. The proper way to help an adult woman onto a toilet without injuring her dignity or my back. The correct temperature for bathwater so it wouldn't scald skin that had become paper thin. The exact consistency of oatmeal that wouldn't cause choking. I'd traded blueprints for medication schedules, client meetings for neurologist appointments. I'd been a senior architect at Brennan and Associates. Partner track. The youngest designer to win the Portland Architecture Award in the firm's 40-year history. I walked away from all of it 3 years ago without a moment's hesitation. Everyone called me a saint for that. I was starting to wonder if I was actually just a fool. Linda's sister Paula arrived that Saturday at 9 in the morning, same as every weekend. She let herself in with the key I'd given her when Linda's diagnosis was confirmed, and I heard her in the kitchen before I saw her. The familiar sounds of someone making themselves at home in a space that wasn't quite theirs. "Hey," she said when I came downstairs. "How was the week?" "Same as last week, and the week before that." Paula nodded. She was 48, 4 years younger than Linda, and the resemblance between them had always been striking. Same auburn hair, same green eyes, Same way of tilting their heads when they were thinking. Looking at Paula now was like looking at a photograph of the woman I'd married. A reminder of everything Linda had been before her brain started eating itself. The sisters had been close once. Growing up in a small house in Eugene, with parents who fought constantly, they'd formed an alliance of survival. Linda had told me stories about it early in our relationship. How Paula would crawl into her bed during their parents' screaming matches. How they'd developed a secret language. How they'd promised each other they'd never become like their mother and father. Now, Paula visited every weekend, helped with Linda's care, and barely met my eyes. I'd always assumed her discomfort was about the disease. Watching her sister disappear must have been agonizing. I never considered there might be another reason. "She's in the sunroom," I said. "Had a rough night." Sundowning hit around 7 and didn't let up until almost midnight. "You should have called me." "What would you have done? Driven over at 11 p.m. to watch her pace around the living room asking where her mother is?" Paula flinched. I hadn't meant it to sound harsh, but I was tired. Bone-deep tired. The kind that doesn't go away with sleep because sleep never really came anymore. "Sorry," I said. "I didn't mean—" "It's fine." She was already moving toward the sunroom. "Go, take a break. Get out of the house for a few hours." I grabbed my jacket and my keys and I left without looking back. That's what Saturdays had become. A few hours of freedom that never felt like freedom because I spent the whole time thinking about what was waiting for me when I returned. The lucid moment came on a Tuesday, 3 days after a particularly bad sundowning episode where Linda had grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave bruises. She'd looked at me with something like recognition and said, "You think I don't know? I know everything. I always knew." I'd chalked it up to the disease. Random neurons firing, creating connections that didn't exist. That's what the doctors said happened sometimes. Fragments of old memories surfacing like debris after a shipwreck. But that Tuesday afternoon, I walked into the sunroom and found Linda sitting in the chair by the window. And something was different. She was looking at the garden. Really looking at it. Not just staring through the glass with that vacant expression I'd grown accustomed to. "The roses need pruning," she said. I stopped in the doorway. Her voice was clear. Not the hesitant, searching voice she usually had. This was Linda. My Linda. The woman who'd argued with me for 3 hours about the placement of that window because she wanted morning light for her plants. "Yeah," I managed. "I've been meaning to get to them." "You always say that." She turned to look at me, and her eyes were present in a way they hadn't been in months. "David, sit down. I need to tell you something." My heart started hammering. Lucid intervals were rare. Dr. Reyes had warned me about them. They could last minutes or hours, and there was no way to predict when they'd end. You just had to make the most of them. I sat in the chair across from her. "What is it?" Linda was quiet for a long moment. She seemed to be gathering herself, or maybe gathering courage. Then she said, "I know about you and Paula." "What?" "I always knew. I just couldn't say anything because—" She trailed off, and for a second I thought the fog was returning. But then she continued. "Because I was the same. Worse. I was worse." "Linda, what are you talking about? There's nothing going on with me and Paula. There never has been." She looked at me with something I couldn't quite identify. Pity? Sadness? Then her expression shifted, became confused, and she asked, "Who are you? Are you the doctor?" Just like that, she was gone again. I sat there for a long time after that, trying to make sense of what she'd said. Me and Paula? That was ridiculous. I barely spoke to the woman beyond logistics, who was bringing groceries when she'd be over, how Linda's sleep had been. If anything, Paula seemed uncomfortable around me, nervous in a way I'd always attributed to the difficulty of watching her sister disappear. But that other part. I was the same, worse. What did that mean? I couldn't sleep that night. I kept replaying Linda's words, trying to find some angle that made them mean something other than what I was starting to suspect they meant. By 3 a.m., I'd given up on rest and found myself standing in the doorway of Linda's old home office. I hadn't been in there since the diagnosis. At first, it was too painful. All those reminders of the woman she'd been, the career she'd built, the life she'd lived. Then, it just became another room I walked past, like the guest bedroom we never used or the attic I kept meaning to clean out. Her laptop was on the desk, right where she'd left it 3 years ago. I opened it and the screen lit up asking for a password. I tried everything. Her birthday, our anniversary, the name of her childhood dog. Nothing worked. 3 days later, I called Greg Lawson. He'd been the IT guy at Brennan and Associates before they outsourced everything, and I'd helped him through a nasty divorce back in 2018. Found him a lawyer, let him crash in our guest room for a week when his wife threw him out. He owed me. Password recovery on a laptop? Yeah, I can walk you through it. But it's not exactly legal territory, you know? She's my wife, Greg. She has Alzheimer's. I have power of attorney over all her affairs. Okay. Just covering my bases. You got access to her phone? I did. It was in the drawer of my nightstand, the last place Linda had put it before she stopped being able to remember how phones worked. I'd kept it charged, some stupid sentimental impulse like maybe one day she'd come back and want to check her messages. Greg walked me through the process. 20 minutes later, I was into Linda's email. 2,147 unread messages. 3 years of newsletters, spam, and the occasional note from old colleagues who hadn't heard about her condition. I started sorting through them, not sure what I was looking for, but unable to stop. Then I found the folder. It was labeled Work Archive, buried under a dozen other folders with equally boring names. Inside, 312 emails from a single sender. Thomas Bennett. I knew that name. He was a senior partner at Hartley Financial, the firm that had handled our investments for the past 15 years. I'd met him maybe twice, at Christmas parties. Tall guy, silver hair, the kind of confident handshake that made you feel like you were the most important person in the room. I opened the first email. Dated January 2011. Subject line: Quick question about your portfolio. It started professional. The first 10 emails were all business, market updates, investment recommendations, scheduling meetings. Normal correspondence between a financial advisor and his client. I almost closed the laptop right there. Almost convinced myself I was paranoid, grief-stricken, seeing conspiracies where none existed. Then the tone shifted. It was wonderful seeing you last week. I can't stop thinking about our conversation. You looked beautiful at the Abbott's party. I hope that's not inappropriate to say. Lindy, I hope you don't mind me calling you that. I have reservations at Piazza Italia on Thursday. Just the two of us. Say yes. Lindy. No one called her that. I'd tried it once, early in our relationship, and she'd told me she hated it. Said it made her sound like a little girl. She'd been so adamant about it that I never tried again. Apparently, she'd just hated it when I said it. I kept reading. The emails evolved over months, then years. Pet names became endearments, became something I could only describe as love letters. He called her Lindy, and she called him T. They had a restaurant, a place in Lake Oswego called the Olive Branch that I'd never heard of. They had hotels. They had weekends. They had 8 years. 2011 to 2019. 8 years of twice-weekly meetings, of business trips that weren't business trips, of conferences that were actually trysts in Carmel or San Francisco or Seattle. 8 years of lies. I did the math in my head. 8 years times 52 weeks times 2 meetings per week. That was roughly 800 times my wife had betrayed me. 800 lies. 800 moments when she'd looked me in the eye and told me she had a late meeting or a work dinner or a girl's weekend, and then gone to be with him. I read until I found the last exchange, dated March 2020, 1 month after Linda's diagnosis was confirmed. From Thomas. I understand. I'll always love you. If you ever need anything at all, I'm here. Always. T. I closed the laptop and walked to the bathroom and threw up. For the next 3 weeks, I became an archaeologist. Not of ancient civilizations, but of my own marriage. I dug through financial records and calendar entries and old receipts, building a timeline of betrayal with the same methodical precision I'd once used to design buildings. The scope of it was staggering. Every late meeting between 2011 and 2019? A lie. That trip to Portland for her college roommate's birthday? She was in San Francisco, with him. The weekend in Vancouver, she said, was for a pharmaceutical conference. They spent it in a suite at the Fairmont. Then I found the bank account. It was buried in a folder of old tax documents, a joint account at a credit union I'd never heard of. Linda's name was on it. So was Paula's. Not mine. Never mine. Over 8 years, $127,000 had been funneled into that account. Small transfers here and there, a few hundred from her paycheck, a few thousand from her bonuses, occasionally larger amounts from inheritance money she'd told me went toward home renovations. The account was empty now. The last withdrawal was January 2020, 1 month before her diagnosis was confirmed. I called Paula. I need you to come over, not tomorrow, now. She must have heard something in my voice because she didn't argue. 40 minutes later, she was sitting in my living room, and I was watching her face as I slid printed copies of the bank statements across the coffee table. She didn't try to lie. I'll give her that much. She took one look at those statements and started crying. How long have you known? I asked. Since the beginning. Since 2011. And you just covered for her? David, did you help her? When she said she was with you, was she actually with him? Paula couldn't look at me. That was answer enough. The betrayal multiplied in my mind. Every phone call to check on Linda's girls' night with Paula. Every time I'd asked Paula if Linda seemed happy, if she seemed stressed, if there was anything I should be worried about. Every reassurance Paula had given me while knowing my wife was in another man's bed. How could you do this? I heard myself say. I trusted you. I asked you about her, about our marriage, and you just... I know. Paula's voice was barely audible. I know what I did. I've lived with it for years. You've lived with it. That's what you're going with? You've had to live with the burden of lying to my face for a decade? I didn't know what else to do. She was my sister. She asked me not to tell, and tell me everything, right now. Don't leave anything out. So she did. Linda had met Thomas at a financial planning seminar in 2010. They'd flirted, exchanged numbers, started meeting for coffee. Paula knew about it early on. Linda had confided in her, asked her to provide alibis. What started as cover for a few lunches became cover for a full-blown affair. She told me she was unhappy, Paula said. She said you were always working, that you cared more about your buildings than about her. I believed her. I thought if she could just get this out of her system, she'd come back to the marriage and everything would be okay. But she didn't come back to the marriage. She kept going for 8 years. I know. She was going to leave me, Paula nodded. She had divorce papers drafted. She was going to tell you after New Year's 2020. She and Thomas had put a down payment on a condo. That's where the money went. They were going to move in together. I absorbed this information the way you absorb a punch to the gut. Not all at once, but in waves. Linda hadn't just cheated on me. She'd been planning to abandon me. 22 years of marriage, and I was about to be discarded like an old piece of furniture she'd grown tired of. What happened? She started forgetting things. Small things at first, where she'd put her keys, appointments she'd made. By February, she couldn't remember where she'd hidden the divorce papers. By March, she couldn't remember Thomas's last name. The universe's cruelest joke. My wife had been about to leave me, and then her brain had started to betray her worse than she'd ever betrayed me. Why didn't you tell me? After the diagnosis, when it was clear she wasn't going to remember any of it. Why didn't you say something? What was the point? Paula's voice was barely a whisper. The woman who did those things is gone. You're taking care of someone who doesn't remember any of it. I thought telling you would just hurt you for no reason. No reason. I laughed, and it was an ugly sound. I gave up my career for her. I gave up my life. I wake up at 5:47 every morning to help a woman I thought loved me. She did love you, in her way. Don't, I stood up. Don't you dare tell me she loved me. Not after everything you just said. Did she ever love me? Really love me? Or was I just the backup plan? Paula didn't answer. That was answer enough. I drove to Lake Oswego 3 days later. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to see him. The house was beautiful. A colonial revival with white columns and a perfectly manicured lawn. The kind of house I might have designed in another life, for clients who could afford to have everything exactly the way they wanted it. I parked across the street and waited. At 8:15 a.m., the front door opened and a man walked out to get the mail. Silver hair, confident stride, expensive suit even though it was a Saturday. Thomas Bennett. He looked like the kind of man women left their husbands for. Successful, handsome, charming. The kind of man who got whatever he wanted because he'd never been told no. I sat in my car and watched him flip through his mail, wave to a neighbor, go back inside. Then I drove home. I didn't confront him. What would I have said? You had an affair with my wife who now thinks I'm her father half the time, and I want you to… What? Apologize? Suffer? None of that would change anything. The Linda who'd loved him, who'd planned a future with him. That Linda was gone, and I was left holding what remained. But I couldn't let it go. Not completely. So a week later, I sent him an email from a new account. Subject: Linda Whitmore. I know everything. I want to meet. Not for a confrontation, for closure. You owe me that much. He responded within the hour. Name the place. We met at a coffee shop in Teagard. A place neither of us would normally go, which was the point. I got there early and sat with my back to the wall, watching the door. When Thomas Bennett walked in, he spotted me immediately and came straight to my table. He moved like a man who owned every room he entered. Confident stride, expensive coat, silver hair perfectly styled. I'd looked him up. 2 ex-wives, 3 children from his first marriage, a reputation for philanthropy and ruthlessness in equal measure. The kind of man who collected trophies. I wondered how long Linda had thought she was special before she realized she was just another addition to his collection. David. He didn't offer his hand. Thomas. He sat down across from me and ordered a black coffee when the waitress came by. I already had mine, untouched. Neither of us spoke until she was gone. "I'm not going to apologize," he said finally. "I know you probably want me to, but I'm not going to." "Why not?" "Because I don't believe I did anything wrong." He said it without a trace of defensiveness, as if we were discussing a minor disagreement about sports. I laughed. I couldn't help it. "You slept with my wife for 8 years. You helped her hide money from me. You were going to move in with her." "Yes, all of that is true." He leaned back in his chair, utterly unruffled. "But I didn't steal her from you. She was already gone. I just gave her somewhere to go." That's a convenient way of looking at it. It's the truth. Linda was unhappy. She told me about your marriage, how you were always at work, how you cared more about your buildings than about her, how she felt invisible. I didn't create that unhappiness, I just offered her an alternative. An alternative that included deceiving me for nearly a decade. I'm not proud of the deception. But the relationship itself? He shook his head. I loved her. Really loved her. Not as a conquest or a distraction, as a partner. Someone I wanted to build a life with. I studied his face, looking for cracks in the facade. I found none. Either he was an exceptional liar, which, given his profession, was entirely possible, or he actually believed what he was saying. I wasn't sure which option was worse. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to reach across that table and wipe that calm, self-satisfied expression off his face. But I didn't. Instead, I asked the question I'd come there to ask. Did she ever tell you about the house? He frowned. What house? Our house. The one I designed for her. I leaned forward. Every room in that house was built specifically for Linda. The sunroom faces east because she hated waking up to western light. The kitchen has 2 ovens because she loved to bake. The master bath has a soaking tub because she told me once that baths were the only time she felt truly relaxed. I didn't just buy her a house, Thomas. I built her one. Every molding, every window, every doorway was placed with her in mind. What did you build her? He didn't have an answer for that. I loved her too, I said. Maybe not the way you did. Maybe I wasn't as exciting, as romantic, as whatever it was that made her choose you. But I loved her enough to design a home around her needs. I loved her enough to walk away from my career when she got sick. I loved her enough to spend the last 3 years of my life helping her eat, helping her bathe, helping her remember who I am for 5 minutes at a time. And now I find out that the whole time I was building that life for her, she was planning to leave. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, She chose to stay with you. In the end, she chose you. No. I shook my head. Her brain chose for her. The disease chose. She didn't come back to me because she loved me. She came back because she forgot she had somewhere else to go. I stood up. One more question. Did she love you? Thomas met my eyes. Yes. More than she ever loved you. I nodded. Then I walked out. I sat in my car for 30 minutes after that, not moving, not thinking, just existing in the wreckage of everything I thought I knew. Then I drove home. Linda was in the sunroom with Paula, who had come over early that day. She looked up when I walked in, and her face lit up with a genuine smile. There you are, she said. I was worried. I sat beside her and took her hand. It was warm and soft and familiar, and I felt absolutely nothing. The worst part wasn't the anger. Anger I could have handled. Anger was clean, simple, something you could point at and say, "That's what I'm feeling." What I had instead was something murkier, a toxic soup of grief, betrayal, and obligation that poisoned everything it touched. Every morning I woke up at 5:47, helped Linda through her routine, made her breakfast, administered her medications. Every afternoon I sat with her while she watched television shows she couldn't follow, asking me the same questions over and over, forgetting my answers as soon as I gave them. Every evening I dealt with the sundowning, the agitation, the paranoia, the desperate wandering that came with the fading light. And the whole time, I knew. I knew what she'd done. I knew who she'd been. And I couldn't say a word about it to anyone. I was still the devoted husband. That's what everyone saw when they looked at me. The neighbors who brought casseroles, the friends who checked in every few weeks, Linda's former colleagues who sent cards on her birthday. To the rest of the world, David Whitmore was a saint, a man who'd given up everything to care for his sick wife. Every compliment felt like a knife. Every "you're such a good person" was a joke I was the only one to understand. "You're doing God's work," the woman from the church told me when she dropped off a casserole. "Not many men would do what you're doing." I smiled and thanked her, and didn't mention that the woman I was caring for had been planning to leave me for another man. I didn't mention the $127,000 she'd hidden. I didn't mention the baby she'd chosen not to have because it might have been mine. Some truths stay buried, some jokes stay private. I started seeing a therapist. Dr. Elaine Cho, specialist in caregiver burnout and complicated grief. Her office was in a bland professional building downtown, and I sat in her waiting room for my first appointment feeling like a fraud. There were magazines on the coffee table, Caregiver Monthly, The Mindful Mind, publications I never knew existed. Around me, other people waited for their appointments. A woman in her 60s clutching a tissue. A man about my age staring at his phone with empty eyes. We were all members of the same terrible club, and none of us wanted to be here. "David Whitmore?" a receptionist called my name, and I followed her down a hallway lined with inspirational posters. Dr. Cho was smaller than I expected, barely 5 feet tall with short gray hair and glasses that magnified her eyes. Her office was warm and cluttered, books everywhere, a small fountain burbling on a shelf. "So," she said, once we were settled, "tell me why you're here." I told her everything. The affair, the emails, the pregnancy. I hadn't gotten to that part yet, but I'd found it in the emails, buried in a thread from 2016. Linda had gotten pregnant. The father was Thomas. She'd terminated it while supposedly visiting her college roommate. I'd discovered it 3 days before my appointment, and I still couldn't think about it without feeling like I was drowning. All those years she'd told me she didn't want children because of her career. All those conversations where I'd gently suggested we might reconsider, and she'd shut me down. All those years I'd quietly grieved the family we'd never have, the children I'd wanted but had learned to live without. And she'd been willing to have children, just not with me. I told Dr. Cho about the money, about Paula's complicity, about the meeting with Thomas. I talked for most of the session, and when I finally stopped, I realized my face was wet. "That's the first time I've cried," I said, "since I found out." "That's not surprising. You've been in survival mode, taking care of Linda, managing the day-to-day. There hasn't been space for grief." I don't even know what I'm grieving. Her? The marriage? The life I thought I had? Probably all of it. Dr. Cho leaned forward. You're experiencing what we call ambiguous loss, the physical presence of someone who is psychologically gone. But your situation is doubled. You're grieving Linda's mind and the marriage you thought you had. You're grieving two people, the woman who is disappearing and the woman you thought you knew. They're not the same person. No, they're not. I stared at the fountain on her shelf, watching the water cycle endlessly over the same stones. So what do I do? How do I live with this? Dr. Cho was quiet for a moment. That's what we're going to figure out together. But I want you to understand something first. There's no right way to feel about what's happened to you. Anger, grief, relief, resentment, all of it is valid. All of it is human. Even wanting her to die? I hadn't meant to say it out loud. The words escaped before I could stop them, and they hung in the air between us like smoke. Yes, Dr. Cho said gently. Even that. I kept caring for Linda. What else was I going to do? I'd researched my options and none of them were good. Divorce was technically possible. Oregon law allowed it when a spouse was incapacitated with court approval. But I'd be the man who divorced his wife with Alzheimer's. Whatever was left of my reputation, my relationships, my sense of myself, all of it would be destroyed. Even if no one knew about the affair, I'd be the villain of the story. I could walk away, let Paula take over. But Paula couldn't afford full-time care, and Medicaid placement would mean a facility, the kind of institutional setting Linda had always said she feared. I couldn't do that to her. Even now, even knowing what I knew, I couldn't consign her to that. So I stayed. Not out of love anymore, but out of something else. Duty? Obligation? Maybe just the absence of any better option. I built walls inside myself. I became Linda's caretaker, not her husband. I performed the tasks of devotion without the emotional content. I helped her eat, helped her dress, helped her navigate a world that grew more confusing to her every day. And I did it all with a professional detachment that would have horrified the man I used to be. It was the only way I could survive. 6 months after discovering the affair, I started drawing again. Small things at first. Thumbnail sketches on napkins, doodles during phone calls with doctors, then larger pieces. I found myself staying up late, after Linda was asleep, working on designs that would never be built. A library for a town that didn't exist. A home for a family I'd never meet. The creativity came back slowly, like blood returning to a numb limb. I'd forgotten how much I'd missed it. The pure joy of putting pencil to paper and watching something emerge from nothing. For 3 years, my entire identity had been Linda's caregiver. Before that, for 22 years, it had been Linda's husband. But before all of that, I'd been an architect, a designer, someone who created things. I reached out to my old firm. Not for a job, I couldn't commit to anything full-time, but to see if there were any consulting opportunities. Remote work, flexible hours, the kind of arrangement that might let me keep one foot in the world I'd left behind. My former partner, Jim Brennan, was thrilled to hear from me. "We've missed you, David. The firm isn't the same without you." I didn't tell him about the affair. I didn't tell him about the walls I'd built or the emotions I'd buried. I just told him I was looking for something small, a way to stay connected to the work. He gave me a project, a guest house for a longtime client. 300 square feet, simple design, plenty of room for creativity. I worked on it at night after Linda's bedtime routine was complete, and I remembered what it felt like to be good at something. 3 months after discovering the affair, I found myself in that same coffee shop in Tigard. Across from me, Thomas Bennett looked older than he had the last time, or maybe I was just seeing him more clearly. The silver hair that had seemed distinguished before now looked thin. The confident posture had a slight hunch to it. Even rich men get old. "You wanted to meet again," he said. "I have to admit, I'm surprised. I have a question, one I couldn't figure out from the emails." "Ask." "Of all the women you could have had, and I know there were others, why her? Why did you pursue her for 8 years?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. He stirred his coffee, though he'd already stirred it twice. A nervous habit, I realized. He wasn't as composed as he pretended to be. Then he said, "She wasn't my only affair. She was one of many, over the years. My first wife left me because of it. My second wife put up with it until she couldn't anymore." He paused. "But Linda was the only one I loved. The only one I wanted to keep. Why?" "She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world, like everything you said mattered, like you were special." He smiled slightly. "I suppose she made you feel that way too, in the early years." I remembered that feeling. The way Linda used to look at me when I showed her my designs, like I was creating something magical. The way she'd laugh at my terrible jokes. The way she'd curl into me on the couch during movie nights. When had that stopped? I couldn't pinpoint it anymore. Maybe it had been gradual, so gradual I hadn't noticed until it was completely gone. "There's something you should know," Thomas said. "Linda broke off the affair in 2019. Not because of the diagnosis, that came later. She ended it because she found out I was sleeping with someone else." I stared at him. "What?" "She was devastated. She'd given me 8 years and I couldn't stay faithful even to her." He shrugged, but there was something beneath the gesture. Shame, maybe, or regret. "After that, she went back to you. She chose you." "She didn't choose me. She had nowhere else to go. Her backup plan fell through, so she defaulted back to plan A." "Maybe, but she stayed. Because a month later she couldn't remember where she'd put the divorce papers." Thomas had no response to that. He looked down at his coffee, and for a moment I saw him clearly. Not as the villain of my story, but as another person who'd been damaged by Linda's choices. He'd loved her too, in his broken way. And she'd left him the same way she was going to leave me. Suddenly, without warning, with no chance to say goodbye. I left without saying goodbye. That night, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I went to a bar. Not to get drunk, just to sit somewhere that wasn't that house, surrounded by people who didn't need anything from me. The place was called Sullivan's, a neighborhood spot on Division Street, the kind of bar where regulars claim their stools and newcomers were tolerated but not welcomed. I didn't care. I just needed to be somewhere that didn't smell like medication and disinfectant. I ordered a whiskey and stared at it for a long time before taking a sip. The burn felt good. Real. A physical sensation that cut through the numbness I'd been carrying for months. Around me, other people were living their normal lives. A couple in their 20s argued playfully about something on the television. A group of co-workers celebrated someone's birthday with too loud laughter. An older man at the end of the bar read the newspaper, completely absorbed. None of them knew me. None of them knew my story. To them, I was just another guy having a drink on a Thursday night. The anonymity was liberating. Rough night? I looked up. A woman had taken the seat next to me. She was about my age, professional looking, with short dark hair and the kind of tired eyes that suggested she understood something about rough nights. She was nursing a glass of wine and looking at me with friendly curiosity. "Rough year," I said. "Rough 3 years, actually." "That calls for a second drink, then," she signaled the bartender. "I'm Grace." "David." We talked. Not about anything important. Work, the weather, a movie she'd seen recently. She was a project manager at a tech company, recently divorced, still figuring out what her life was supposed to look like now. Normal conversation, the kind I'd almost forgotten how to have. She told me about her kids, two teenagers who split their time between her house and their father's. She told me about the trip to Italy she was planning, the cooking class she'd started taking, the book club she'd joined even though she never finished the books. Small things. Normal things. A life being rebuilt one piece at a time. She didn't ask about my wedding ring. Maybe she noticed it, maybe she didn't. I didn't offer any explanations. When I finally left, I didn't get her number. I wasn't ready for that. Might never be ready for it. But something had shifted. For the first time in 3 years, I'd felt like a person, not just a caretaker. I'd felt seen by someone who didn't need anything from me. I drove home with the windows down, letting the cold air keep me awake. A month later, a letter arrived from Hartley Financial. Thomas Bennett was requesting a meeting, not at a coffee shop, but at his firm's offices. The subject: Linda's investments. I hadn't known there were investments to discuss. Not investments that weren't already joint accounts. In Thomas's office, surrounded by mahogany furniture and framed awards, I learned the truth. Linda had started a personal portfolio in 2012. Over the years, she'd added to it. Her bonuses, the inheritance from her father that she'd told me went toward home renovations. Thomas had been managing it as a favor. The current value, $312,000. She was going to use it to fund her new life, Thomas said. When she decided to stay, she never closed the account. I've been maintaining it, keeping it growing. But now that she's incapacitated, someone needs to take over guardianship of the account. I looked at the paperwork in front of me. All those years, all those lies. And here was the financial proof in black and white. What do you want me to do with it? That's not my decision. I could have taken the money. It would have covered years of Linda's care, reduced my financial stress, maybe even let me hire help. But I knew where that money came from. Every dollar represented a lie. Put it in a trust, I said, for her long-term care. I won't touch it personally. If there's anything left after she's gone, donate it to Alzheimer's research. Thomas raised an eyebrow. That's noble of you. It's not noble. It's just the right thing to do. I signed the paperwork and stood to leave. At the door, Thomas said, "You're a better man than me." I turned back and met his eyes. "I know." I walked out. That night, Linda had another lucid moment. The longest one yet. Nearly 45 minutes of clarity, like the clouds parting just long enough to see the sun. She looked at me and said, "I'm so tired. I don't want to fight anymore." Fight what? Everything. The forgetting. The remembering. Her voice cracked. I remember things I wish I didn't. I didn't know what to say. I sat beside her, waiting. "I wasn't a good wife," she said finally. "I know you know. I can see it in the way you look at me now. Like I'm a stranger." I wanted to deny it. I wanted to tell her that none of it mattered, that the disease had erased all of it, that I'd forgiven her. But I couldn't make myself form the words. I don't know why I did it, she continued. I keep trying to remember and I can't. I know there was someone. I know I hurt you. I just can't remember why it seemed so important. I took her hand. Her fingers were thin now, fragile. I'm sorry, she whispered, for whatever I did. I'm sorry. Then the fog returned. She asked where we were. She asked if I was the doctor. The window closed, and she was gone again. A year after discovering the affair, I found myself in a support group for caregivers. Dr. Cho had recommended it months ago, but I'd resisted. Sitting in a circle with strangers talking about feelings, it wasn't my style. But loneliness has a way of breaking down resistance. I went to a meeting, then another. I found people who understood something about what I was going through. Not the affair, I never told them that, but the exhaustion, the grief, the guilt of wanting it to be over. The meetings were held in the basement of a Methodist church on Hawthorne. Folding chairs, bad coffee, fluorescent lights that buzzed just loud enough to be annoying. The group leader was a woman named Margaret who'd cared for her husband through pancreatic cancer. She had the kind of calm that only comes from having already lived through the worst thing. We're all doing impossible work, she said at my first meeting, and most of us are doing it alone. This is a place to be together in that loneliness. It sounded like something from a self-help book, but it was also true. There was a woman in the group named Rebecca. She was 51, caring for her mother who had vascular dementia. Tall, dark-haired, with a dry sense of humor that surfaced at unexpected moments. We started talking after meetings, then meeting for coffee. She was easy to be around. No expectations, no judgment, just two people sharing the weight of impossible situations. My husband left, she told me one afternoon, 2 years into my mother's illness. Said he didn't sign up for this. As if any of us sign up for it. Where is he now? Florida, remarried, has a boat. She laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. I hope he gets seasick. Does it make you a terrible person? She asked me once. Wanting it to end? I don't know. I ask myself that every day. I love my mother, but sometimes I catch myself wishing she'd just go. And then I hate myself for thinking it. I don't think it makes you terrible, I said. I think it makes you human. She looked at me with something like gratitude. You're the first person who's ever said that to me. We weren't dating. I wasn't sure what we were. But I knew that sitting across from her in that coffee shop, talking about nothing and everything, felt more real than anything had in years. Linda's decline accelerated in the months that followed. The lucid moments stopped entirely. She no longer recognized me. Sometimes I was the nice man who comes to help, sometimes daddy, sometimes just a stranger who appeared in her house without explanation. We started talking about hospice care. Not because she was dying, not immediately, but because the level of care she needed had exceeded what I could provide at home. Paula found a memory care facility that specialized in Alzheimer's patients. We toured it together, asked questions, pretended we weren't planning the beginning of the end. Linda moved into the facility on a Thursday. I helped pack her things, helped her settle into her new room, helped her understand that this was home now. She didn't fight it. She didn't really understand it. The room was nice, private, with a window overlooking a garden. The staff had done their best to make it feel homey, but there was no disguising what it was. A place where people went to finish dying. I hung a few photographs on the wall. Our wedding, her 40th birthday, a trip to Hawaii we'd taken before everything went wrong. She looked at them with polite interest, like a museum visitor examining artifacts from an ancient civilization. "These are beautiful," she said. "Who is this woman?" "That's you," I told her. "A long time ago." "She looks happy." She was. I think she was. I visited 3 times a week. I brought flowers because she seemed to like them, even if she couldn't remember who had given them to her. I sat with her and told her stories about our life together. The early years, the good years, before everything went wrong. She listened with the attention of a child hearing a fairy tale about someone else. Some visits were harder than others. There were days when she was agitated, convinced that someone was trying to steal from her, or that she needed to get to a meeting that had happened 20 years ago. There were days when she barely acknowledged my presence, preferring to stare at the television or the birds outside her window. And there were days, rare but precious, when something would click, and she'd look at me with a glimmer of recognition. "I know you," she'd say. "You're important." "I'm your husband," I'd tell her. "I'm David." "David." She'd repeat the name like she was tasting it. "That's a nice name." The money from Linda's secret account covered 18 months of premium care. When it ran out, I did what I'd sworn I'd never do. I sold the house I'd designed for her, the prison that had become my home. I walked through it one last time before the closing, room by room. The sunroom where Linda had read her books and watched her garden grow. The kitchen with 2 ovens that hadn't been used in years. The master bath with the soaking tub where she'd spent hours relaxing after long days at work. Every inch of that house had been designed with her in mind, and now strangers would live in it, never knowing what it had meant. The real estate agent had called it a craftsman masterpiece in the listing. She'd raved about the attention to detail, the quality of construction, the way the light moved through the rooms. What she didn't know was that every decision I'd made in that house had been an act of love. Or what I'd thought was love, before I learned that love wasn't always returned. A young couple bought it. Newlyweds, just starting out, in love with the sunroom and the kitchen with 2 ovens. They thanked me for creating something so beautiful. I took their check and signed over the deed and walked away without looking back. I moved into a condo downtown. Smaller, simpler, with no coffered ceilings and no soaking tub. The views were of other buildings instead of gardens, and the only person I had to take care of was myself. It was exactly what I needed. A year after that, I was sitting in the memory care facility with Linda when Paula walked in. We didn't talk much these days, too much history, too many lies, but she still visited regularly. Her guilt had become its own kind of devotion. Linda looked up at Paula and smiled. "Hello, are you my friend?" "Yes," Paula said. "I'm your friend." She sat on the other side of the bed, and we watched Linda turn her attention to the flowers I'd brought. Daffodils because it was spring, and she'd always loved daffodils. "She seems peaceful," Paula said quietly. "She is. Whatever's left of her, she's not in pain. She's not afraid. She's just fading." Paula nodded. We sat in silence for a while, united by the woman between us and divided by everything we knew. "I'm selling my condo," Paula said eventually. "Moving to Seattle. I got a transfer at work." "That's good. I'll still visit when I can, but I think—" She trailed off, then started again. "I think it's time for me to build something new. Somewhere that isn't weighed down by all of this." I understood exactly what she meant. "Take care of yourself, Paula." "You too, David." She kissed Linda's forehead and left. I knew I'd probably never see her again, and I was surprised to find that I didn't mind. I was back at the firm by then, a different firm, smaller, with younger partners who cared more about design than prestige. I designed residential spaces, homes for families, apartments for singles, guest houses for people who wanted a place to put their visiting parents. The work was satisfying in a way I hadn't expected. After years of designing buildings that would impress critics and win awards, there was something grounding about creating spaces where real people would actually live. Rebecca and I were dating. It had started slowly, carefully, built on honesty in a way that my marriage to Linda never was. Our first real date had been awkward. Two middle-aged people who'd forgotten how dating worked, sitting across from each other at a restaurant, trying to make conversation that didn't involve dementia or caregiving. "This is strange," she'd said, halfway through dinner. "I feel like I'm in high school again, except with more arthritis." I'd laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months, and something had shifted between us. She knew everything: the affair, the betrayal, the years of caring for a woman who'd been planning to leave me. I'd told her over coffee one afternoon, expecting her to recoil, to make excuses, to disappear from my life the way so many others had. Instead, she'd been quiet for a long moment, then said, "That must have been incredibly painful." "It was. It still is. Thank you for telling me." She'd reached across the table and taken my hand. "I know that wasn't easy." She listened without judgment, and then she told me about her own life. The marriage that ended badly, the children who rarely called, the mother she loved and resented in equal measure. We weren't two people falling in love despite our baggage. We were two people falling in love because of it. We weren't rushing into anything. We'd both learned where rushing got you. The end came on a Tuesday. A nurse called me at 7 a.m. to say Linda had stopped breathing during the night. They'd tried to revive her, but she was gone. I don't remember getting dressed or driving to the facility. I don't remember parking or walking through the lobby or taking the elevator to the third floor. The next thing I knew, I was standing in Linda's room, looking at her body. She looked peaceful, younger somehow, with the confusion finally smoothed from her features. Her hands were folded across her chest, and someone had placed the stuffed bear Paula had given her next to her on the pillow. The woman lying on that bed wasn't the woman I'd married. She wasn't the woman who'd betrayed me either. She was just Linda. Whatever was left of her at the end. I sat in the chair by her bed, the same chair I'd sat in hundreds of times over the past years, holding her hand, telling her stories, watching her disappear. I sat there for an hour, just the two of us. "I don't know how to do this," I said to her body, to the empty air. "I've been so angry at you, for so long, and now you're gone, and I don't know what to do with all of it." No answer. Of course, no answer. "I hope you found peace," I said finally. "I hope wherever you are now, you remember who you were, the good parts, the parts that loved me, even if it wasn't enough." I kissed her forehead. Then I called Paula, and I called the funeral home, and I started the process of saying goodbye. The service was small. Linda had outlived most of her friends, and the family that remained was just Paula and a few distant cousins. The minister said nice things about a woman he'd never met, and Paula read a poem Linda had loved in college. I didn't speak. I didn't know what I would say. We buried her next to her parents in a cemetery overlooking the river, and I stood at the grave until everyone else had left. The sky was gray, threatening rain, and the wind carried the smell of wet earth and cut flowers. Rebecca found me there an hour later. She didn't say anything, just stood beside me and held my hand. "I don't know how to feel," I said finally. I loved her. I hated what she did. I grieved her for years before she died, and now that she's gone, I don't know what's left. Maybe there doesn't have to be one feeling. Maybe you can just feel all of it. I turned to look at her. This woman who had walked into my life at the exact moment I needed someone, who had seen all the broken parts of me and stayed anyway. I'm ready, I said, to build something new, with you. Rebecca smiled. It was a sad smile, but a real one. Okay, she said, let's build something. We walked away from the grave together. The sun was setting over the river, turning the water gold. I didn't look back,